April 12th, 1945, somewhere over the East China Sea, 20 kilometers from Okinawa. The engine screams. My Mitsubishi A6M0 shudders as American tracers tear through the left wing. Salt spray from the ocean below mixes with smoke from my burning fuel tank. My hands grip the control stick so hard my knuckles have gone white. I can see the American destroyer, my target, growing larger through the oil-smeared canopy. 2 kilometers, 90 seconds to impact. 90 seconds until I become a god. If you want to know how I survived a suicide mission, why the Americans didn't execute me, and what it's like to come back from the dead, hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and drop a comment below telling me, would you have gone through with it? Let me find out. My name is Lieutenant Takeshi Yamamoto. I am 21 years old. I am a pilot in the Special Attack Corps, what the Americans call Kamikaze, divine wind, and I am supposed to be dead. March 15th, 1945. Final letter to my parents. By the time you read this, I will have struck a blow for the Emperor and our sacred homeland. Do not mourn me. I die with honor, following the path of the warrior. My only regret is that I have but one life to give. Your devoted son, Takeshi. I wrote those words 3 weeks ago in the barracks at Kanoya Air Base in southern Kyushu. I believed every word. I was ready to die, eager even. My training had prepared me for this moment since I volunteered for the Special Attack Corps in January, but nobody prepared me for what would happen if I failed. Let me take you back. Let me tell you how a university student from Tokyo became a human bomb, and how the Americans, the enemy I'd been taught to hate, became the ones who saved my life. December 1944, Imperial Japanese Navy Flight Training School, Tsuchiura. I wasn't supposed to be a pilot. I was supposed to be an engineer. I'd been studying mechanical engineering at Waseda University when the draft notice came in October 1943. I was 19. My father had pulled strings to get me a deferment. But by late 43, Japan was running out of bodies to throw at the Americans. They needed pilots more than they needed engineers. The Navy looked at my test scores. I'd always been good with mathematics and physics, and assigned me to flight training. 6 months of basic instruction, learning to take off, land, navigate. The fundamentals. By June 1944, I had my wings. I was assigned to a fighter squadron operating out of Rabaul. I never made it. The squadron was annihilated before I could join them, so they reassigned me to Homeland Defense, flying patrols over the Kanto Plain, searching for B-29 bombers that were starting to hit Tokyo with increasing frequency. I shot down my first B-29 in November 1944. It was pure luck. I happened to be in the right position at the right altitude when the formation passed. I fired a burst into the bomber's No. 3 engine, watched it catch fire, watched the crew bail out, watched the massive plane spiral down into the rice paddies below. My squadron commander congratulated me. My father wrote me a proud letter. I felt nothing, because by November 1944, everyone knew we were losing. The Philippines were falling. Saipan was gone. The Marianas were American bases now, staging points for the B-29s that were systematically destroying our cities. Our Navy barely existed anymore. Most of our carriers had been sunk at Midway and Leyte Gulf. We were dying, slowly, inevitably. And then Admiral Onishi proposed a solution. The Special Attack Corps, volunteers who would load their planes with explosives and fly them directly into American ships. 1 pilot, 1 plane, 1 ship. It was simple mathematics. We couldn't match American production. They were building ships faster than we could sink them with conventional attacks. But if every plane was guaranteed to hit its target, the mathematics changed. It was brilliant. It was insane. It was our only hope. The call for volunteers went out in January 1945. I was in the ready room when the announcement came. Our commanding officer, Captain Nakajima, a veteran of the China campaign, stood before us and explained what they were asking. "The Empire needs men willing to make the ultimate sacrifice," he said. His voice was steady, emotionless. "Men who understand that individual life means nothing compared to the survival of our nation and our emperor. Men who are ready to become human bullets, flying directly into the enemy fleet." He paused, looked at each of us. 23 pilots in that room. Boys, really. The youngest was 17, the oldest was 28. "This is voluntary," Nakajima continued. "No one will think less of you if you choose not to participate. But those who do volunteer will be honored forever. Your names will be enshrined at Yasukuni. Your families will be revered. You will become gods." Gods. That word hung in the air like smoke. "Those who wish to volunteer, step forward." I stood up. I didn't think about it, I just stood, because what else was there? We were losing anyway. At least this way, my death would matter. At least this way, I could protect my family, my country. Something. 17 of the 23 pilots stepped forward. The 6 who didn't were transferred out the next day. I never saw them again. We were the lucky ones, they told us. We got to choose how we died. February 1945. Kanoya Air Base, Kyushu. Kamikaze training wasn't what I expected. I thought they'd teach us special tactics, advanced techniques for breaking through American fighter screens and anti-aircraft fire. Instead, they taught us how to aim. That was it. How to angle your dive so you hit the ship's bridge or ammunition stores. How to compensate for wind. How to maintain control when every instinct screams at you to pull up. They didn't teach us how to take off or land. We wouldn't be landing. They stripped everything unnecessary from our Zeros. Radios, pointless. We wouldn't be communicating. Life rafts, laughable. Parachutes, cowardice. They added a 250-kilogram bomb under the fuselage and filled the tanks with just enough fuel for a one-way trip. Our instructor was Lieutenant Seki, one of the first kamikaze pilots to achieve success. He'd somehow survived his first mission. Mechanical failure forced him to abort, and they'd made him a trainer instead of sending him out again. "The key is commitment," Seki told us during one session. We sat in a classroom, taking notes like university students studying for an exam. Except the exam was death. The moment you hesitate, you fail. The Americans will shoot you down. You'll die for nothing. He clicked to the next slide, grainy photographs of American destroyers taken from reconnaissance planes. Aim for the waterline if you can. If not, the bridge. If you're on fire and losing control, anywhere is better than nothing. But commitment is everything. You must be willing to die. I raised my hand. "Lieutenant, how do you overcome the fear?" Seki looked at me. His eyes were hollow, like he'd already died, and just hadn't fallen down yet. "You don't," he said quietly. "You just do it anyway." Training lasted 6 weeks. We practiced dive angles on land-based targets. We flew practice runs where we'd pull up at the last second. We wrote our final letters home. We had our photographs taken in full uniform, serious expressions, knowing these images would be the last our families ever saw of us. We were given white headbands with the rising sun, senenbari, 1,000-stitch belts made by our mothers and sisters, each stitch a prayer for our safety. Ironic, considering we were volunteering to crash into ships. We drank sake and sang military songs and pretended we weren't terrified. On March 10th, they told us we'd be deploying to Okinawa. The Americans had invaded. The largest kamikaze operation of the war, Operation Tengo, was about to begin. Waves of suicide attacks designed to destroy the American fleet before they could take the island. We would be part of the first wave. April 6th, 1945. Kanoya Air Base. The briefing room was packed. 50 pilots, 50 planes, 50 bombs. The largest single kamikaze mission yet. Captain Nakajima stood at the front with a map of Okinawa and the surrounding waters. Red circles marked the American fleet positions. Hundreds of ships, destroyers, cruisers, battleships, carriers. The entire U.S. Fifth Fleet spread across the ocean like a steel blanket. "Gentlemen," Nakajima began, "today you will strike the decisive blow. Today you will save the Empire." He outlined the plan. We'd fly in formation until we reached Okinawa, then split up and attack individual targets. Fighter escorts would accompany us part way, engaging American interceptors to give us a clear path to the fleet. My target, a destroyer on radar picket duty 30 kilometers north of Okinawa. They called them small boys, destroyers stationed far from the main fleet to provide early warning of air attacks. Alone. Vulnerable. Perfect targets. "You will encounter anti-aircraft fire," Nakajima continued. "You will encounter fighters. Do not be deterred. Press your attack. Remember, one plane, one ship. Your death will not be meaningless." After the briefing, we gathered in the ready room. Ground crews were preparing the planes, fueling them, loading the bombs, painting rising sun emblems on the fuselages. Some pilots were writing last-minute letters. Others sat in silence, staring at nothing. I found myself standing next to Ensign Hayashi, a kid from Osaka, 18 years old. He joined the Navy straight from high school. His hands were shaking as he tried to light a cigarette. "You scared?" I asked. "Terrified," he admitted. "You?" "Yes." We stood there smoking, watching the sun rise over the airfield. It was a beautiful morning. Clear skies, light wind, perfect flying weather, perfect dying weather. "Do you think we'll actually hit anything?" Hayashi asked quietly. "Or will the Americans shoot us all down before we get close?" I didn't have an answer. The statistics weren't encouraging. Intelligence suggested only 1 in 10 kamikaze pilots successfully hit their targets. The rest were shot down by fighters or anti-aircraft fire. They died without accomplishing anything, but we weren't supposed to think about that. "We'll succeed," I said, because that's what he needed to hear. "The Emperor is watching." At 1100 hours, they called us to the flight line. 50 Zeros lined up on the runway, engines warming up, propellers spinning. Ground crews stood at attention. Officers saluted. Someone played a recording of the national anthem over the loudspeakers. I climbed into my Zero, tail number 5347. The cockpit was cramped, familiar. I'd flown this particular plane a dozen times in training. It felt like an old friend, a friend that would carry me to my death. The ground crew chief, a sergeant named Tanaka, who'd been maintaining planes since the China War, climbed up to help me strap in. He checked my harness, adjusted my headband, made sure everything was secure. "It's been an honor, Lieutenant," he said quietly. His eyes were wet. "The honor is mine, Sergeant." He saluted, climbed down, removed the chocks from the wheels. One by one, the Zeros began taking off. The roar of 50 engines filled the air. I watched them go. Hayashi's plane third in line, then others, rising into the clear blue sky like birds heading south for winter. My turn. I advanced the throttle. The Zero accelerated down the runway, faster, faster, the ground blurring beneath me. I pulled back on the stick. The wheels left the earth. I was airborne, heading south toward Okinawa, heading toward my death. Behind me, I could see the ground crews standing at attention, saluting our departure. Behind them, the mountains of Kyushu. Behind them somewhere, my family in Tokyo who thought I was already dead. I never expected to see any of it again. April 12, 1945, 1340 hours. Approaching Okinawa. We'd been in the air for 3 hours. The formation had already started breaking up. Some planes turned back with mechanical problems, others shot down by American fighters that intercepted us 50 kilometers north of Okinawa. Our fighter escorts had peeled off 20 minutes ago, low on fuel, leaving us alone for the final approach. I'd counted 8 planes go down. Hayashi's wasn't one of them, not yet. Then I saw it. The American destroyer. Small, grey, alone on the ocean. Smoke rising from its stacks, guns bristling from every surface. It sat there like a steel island, and I was supposed to crash into it. The anti-aircraft fire started immediately. Black puffs of smoke exploded around my plane. Proximity-fused shells that didn't need to hit you directly. Just getting close was enough. The shrapnel would shred your aircraft to pieces. I pushed the stick forward, beginning my dive. The Zero accelerated. Wind screaming past the canopy. The destroyer grew larger. I could see sailors running on the deck, see the guns tracking me, see tracers arcing up toward my plane. This is it, I thought. This is how I die. Honorably. For the Emperor. For Japan. 1 kilometer, 30 seconds. Something hit my wing. The Zero lurched sideways. I fought the controls, trying to level out. More hits. The engine started coughing. Smoke filled the cockpit. I was going down anyway. Might as well hit the target. 800 meters. 20 seconds. The destroyer was firing everything. 5-inch guns, 40mm Bofors, 20mm Oerlikon cannons. The air was solid metal. I should have been dead already. Everyone else who'd attempted this attack was dead. Hayashi was dead. 50 planes had taken off this morning, and maybe 10 would hit their targets. But I was still flying, still diving, still committed. 500 meters, 12 seconds. I could see individual sailors now. Young men just like me. Americans, the enemy. They were supposed to be demons, monsters, but they looked like boys. Scared boys operating guns, trying to kill me before I killed them. For a moment, one brief, terrible moment, I understood something. They didn't want to die any more than I did. 300 meters, 7 seconds. I thought about my mother. About the last time I'd seen her at Tokyo Station when I left for flight training. She'd cried, told me to be careful. I'd promised I would. I'd lied. 200 meters, 4 seconds. Something exploded in the cockpit. Fire everywhere. Controls dead. The Zero was just falling now, a burning meteor aimed at the destroyer, at the sailors, at the boys who wanted to live. 100 meters, 2 seconds. I closed my eyes, and then... impact, but not with the ship, with the water. The Zero hit the ocean 20 meters short of the destroyer's starboard side. The force of the collision snapped me forward against the harness. Water exploded through the shattered canopy. The plane was sinking, filling with seawater, dragging me down. I'd failed. I was dying anyway, but I'd failed. The destroyer was intact. The Americans had won. I should have stayed strapped in, should have let the ocean take me. That would have been honorable. That would have been what a true warrior did. But I didn't want to die. Not like this. Not drowning in a sinking plane, alone in the dark water, having accomplished nothing. I released the harness, kicked free of the cockpit, swam upward through wreckage and fuel oil, my lungs burning, my vision darkening. I broke the surface gasping, choking on salt water and oil. The destroyer was right there, massive, so close I could have touched it. Sailors lined the rails, pointing guns at me, shouting in English. I couldn't understand the words, but the meaning was clear. Surrender or die. I raised my hands above the water. The universal signal. I surrender. They threw me a rope. I grabbed it. They pulled me toward the ship, through the oil slick and debris from my Zero. I could see the bomb, still intact, floating among the wreckage. It hadn't detonated. If it had, I wouldn't be here. Strong hands grabbed me, hauled me up the side of the destroyer. American sailors, bigger than any Japanese men I'd ever seen. They threw me onto the deck. Someone kicked my legs apart, searched me for weapons, found nothing. My pistol had been lost in the crash. I lay there on the steel deck, coughing up seawater, covered in oil and blood and shame. Alive. A prisoner. A failure. An officer knelt beside me, young, maybe 25, with Lieutenant Bars on his collar. He said something in English. I shook my head. No English. He tried again in terrible Japanese. You okay? Hurt? I stared at him. This was the enemy. I'd just tried to kill him, and everyone on this ship. He should have been shooting me. Instead, he was asking if I was hurt. Why? I managed to say in Japanese. Why didn't you let me die? He didn't understand the words, but maybe he understood the question. He just shook his head and called for a medic. They carried me below deck, to the sick bay. An American doctor, a lieutenant commander with kind eyes, examined me, checked for injuries, cleaned the oil from my face, bandaged a cut on my forehead. He spoke in English to a sailor who spoke some Japanese. A Nisei, I realized later, a Japanese American. The translator explained, "The doctor says you're lucky. Broken rib, possible concussion, but nothing life-threatening. You'll live. I'll live." The words felt like mockery. I was supposed to die a hero. Instead, I'd live as a coward, a kamikaze pilot who'd survived his mission. There is no word in Japanese for what I was. No honor, no glory, just shame. They put me in a small compartment, probably a storage locker converted into a makeshift brig, locked the door, left me alone with a blanket, a cup of water, and my failure. I sat there in the darkness as the destroyer continued its patrol. I could hear the engines rumbling, feel the ship moving through the water, alive, undamaged, because I'd missed. Somewhere above me, the crew was probably celebrating. They'd shot down the kamikaze. They'd survived. They were heroes. I was nothing. That first night I tried to kill myself. I looked for anything sharp, anything I could use. But the compartment was empty except for the blanket. They'd thought of everything. I tried to strangle myself with the blanket, but couldn't make it work. Survival instincts kept taking over. I couldn't even kill myself properly. I couldn't do anything right. The translator came to see me the next morning. He brought food. Rice, surprisingly, not that different from what we ate in the Navy. And water. And clean clothes. "I'm Sergeant Takahashi," he said in perfect Japanese. "I was born in Los Angeles. My parents were from Hiroshima. I'm here to help you." I spat at his feet. "Traitor." He didn't react, just set the food down and sat across from me. "I know what you're thinking, but you're alive. That means something. It means I failed. It means you get a second chance. Most kamikaze pilots don't. I don't want a second chance. I want to die with honor." Takahashi was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My cousin was a kamikaze pilot. He died at Leyte Gulf, hit an escort carrier, killed himself and 200 Americans. Is he more honorable than you because he succeeded in dying?" "Yes, and the 200 Americans he killed. They had families. They wanted to live. Is his honor worth their lives?" I had no answer for that. I'd never thought about the Americans as real people. They were just the enemy, targets, things to destroy. But that officer who'd asked if I was okay, he'd been real. The doctor who'd treated my wounds, he'd been real. "What happens to me now?" I asked finally. "You're a prisoner of war. You'll be transferred to a POW camp, probably on Okinawa once we secure the island. You'll be treated according to the Geneva Conventions. You'll be fed, kept safe, and eventually, when the war ends, you'll go home." Home. The word sounded impossible. How could I go home? How could I face my family? My father had been so proud when I joined the Special Attack Corps. My mother had made my Seninbari belt, each stitch a prayer. They thought I was dead, a hero, enshrined at Yasukuni, my photograph on the family altar. How could I tell them I'd survived, that I'd failed, that their son was a coward who'd been fished from the ocean by Americans? "I can't go home," I whispered. "I'm already dead." Takahashi stood up. "No, you're alive. And that's harder. But it's what you have to do now. You have to learn to live." He left me alone with the food and my thoughts. April 15th, 1945, USS Hazelwood, 3 days after capture. They moved me to a larger compartment on the third day, still locked, but with a porthole. I could see the ocean, watch the sun rise and set, watch other ships in the American fleet, dozens of them, hundreds maybe. An armada so vast it seemed to cover the entire ocean. We'd never had a chance. The mathematics I'd believed in, one plane, one ship, had been a lie. Even if every kamikaze hit their target, there were too many American ships. They could absorb the losses. They could replace them faster than we could train new pilots. The war was already over. We just hadn't admitted it yet. Other prisoners were brought aboard, 2 pilots from later Kamikaze waves, a submarine crew whose boat had been depth-charged. Each time, I heard the same story: capture, medical treatment, imprisonment. The Americans weren't executing anyone. They weren't torturing anyone. They were just keeping us alive. It was baffling. We'd been taught that surrender meant torture and death, that the Americans were barbarians who'd rape and kill prisoners, that we should save our last bullet for ourselves rather than face capture. But it was all lies, propaganda to keep us fighting, to keep us dying willingly. On the 5th day, they brought someone new to see me, a naval intelligence officer, Lieutenant Wilson, with Takahashi translating. Wilson was older, maybe 40, with grey hair and tired eyes. "I'm not here to interrogate you," Wilson said through Takahashi. "I know you're not going to tell me anything useful. You're a pilot, not a planner. You don't know anything we don't already know." I said nothing. "I'm here because I'm curious," Wilson continued. "Why did you do it? Why volunteer to kill yourself? For the Emperor? For Japan? That's the official answer. What's the real answer?" I thought about that. What was the real answer? Pride? Fear? Peer pressure? The belief that individual life meant nothing compared to the collective? Or just the simple fact that we were losing and dying felt better than living with defeat? "Because there was nothing else," I said finally. "No other way to matter. No other way to protect what I loved." Wilson nodded slowly. "We're not so different, you and I. I joined the Navy to protect my country too. I've killed men in battle, good men probably, men with families and dreams, but I did it because that's what war is. Then why save me? Why not let me die? Because saving you costs us nothing and might teach us something. Because you're not my enemy anymore. You're just a kid who made a choice. And maybe that choice doesn't have to define the rest of your life." He stood up to leave, then paused. "Your country told you that dying was honorable, but they were wrong. Living is harder, and maybe that makes it more honorable. Something to think about." After he left, I sat by the porthole and watched the sun set over the Pacific. The same sun that rose over Japan. The same sun that had shone on my last morning at Kanoya Air Base when I'd been so certain of my purpose. Now I was certain of nothing. That night, I dreamed about my mother. In the dream, she was at the family altar, praying before my photograph, crying, mourning a son who wasn't actually dead. I woke up with tears on my face. For the first time since my capture, I was glad I'd survived, not for me, but for her, so that someday, somehow, I could tell her I was alive, so her prayers wouldn't be wasted on a dead son who was still breathing. Maybe Takahashi was right. Maybe living was harder. Maybe that made it worth doing. April 28, 1945, Okinawa, POW camp. They transferred me to Okinawa 2 weeks after my capture. By then, the Americans had secured most of the southern part of the island. The POW camp was a fenced compound near the beach, tents, guard towers, barbed wire, hundreds of Japanese prisoners, soldiers, sailors, pilots, all of us alive when we should have been dead. The shame was everywhere. You could see it in how prisoners avoided eye contact, how we barely spoke to each other. We were all failures, all cowards, all men who'd chosen life over honor. The camp commander was a Marine colonel named Harrison. He gave a speech when I arrived, Takahashi translating. "You are prisoners of war," Harrison said. "You will be treated humanely according to international law. You will be fed, sheltered, and allowed to write letters home. You will work to maintain this camp. In return, we expect no trouble. Anyone who attempts escape or violence will be punished, but those who cooperate will be treated fairly." It was surreal. We were the enemy. We'd killed Americans, yet here they were, promising to feed us and keep us safe. That first night I met another kamikaze pilot. His name was Lieutenant Sato, no relation to my training instructor. He'd been shot down during the same wave as me, crashed into the ocean, been rescued by a destroyer. How do you live with it? I asked him. We were sitting in our tent, eating sea rations the Americans had given us. Canned beef, crackers, coffee, better food than we'd had in the Japanese Navy for months. I don't know yet, Sato admitted. Every day I wake up and remember I'm supposed to be dead, that my family thinks I'm dead, that I failed. Do you regret surviving? He was quiet for a long time. Yes, and no, I regret failing. I regret the shame, but he gestured around the camp. I'm alive. I can see the sunrise, taste food, feel wind. That has to count for something. Does it? I'm trying to believe it does. Over the following weeks, I fell into the camp routine. We worked, cleaning, cooking, maintaining the facilities. We ate, we slept, we existed. Some prisoners tried to maintain military discipline, holding formations and saluting officers. Others gave up entirely, becoming hollow-eyed ghosts who went through the motions of living without really being alive. I fell somewhere in between. The Americans were professional. Not friendly exactly, but not cruel. They followed the rules. They gave us medical care. They even brought in Japanese language books and let us organize educational classes. It was nothing like the propaganda, nothing like what we'd been told. In May, the war in Europe ended. Germany surrendered. The camp guards celebrated, but quietly. They knew the war with Japan was still raging. They knew more men would die before it ended. I wondered if my death would have mattered. If my Zero had hit that destroyer, would it have changed anything? Would it have stopped the Americans from taking Okinawa, from bombing our cities, from eventually invading the home islands? Or would it just have been one more death in a war full of meaningless deaths? I was starting to think I knew the answer. June 1945, Okinawa. The letters started arriving in June. The Red Cross was forwarding mail to POWs who'd been confirmed as captured rather than killed. My name was on the list. Sergeant Takahashi brought me the envelope, my mother's handwriting on the front, shaking, careful characters that I'd recognize anywhere. "Do you want privacy?" Takahashi asked. I nodded. He left me alone in the tent. I stared at the envelope for 10 minutes before opening it. Inside, 2 pages written in my mother's neat script, dated May 20th, 1945. My dearest Takeshi, I received word from the Red Cross that you are alive. Captured, but alive. I cannot describe the emotions I felt when I read those words. Joy, relief, confusion, grief for the grief I felt believing you dead, anger that you did not die as we were told you would. Your father will not speak of it. He says you have dishonored the family by surrendering. He removed your photograph from the altar, but I do not care about honor. I care about my son, and my son is alive. The war is not going well. Tokyo is being bombed almost every night now. Our neighborhood was hit last week. The Tanaka family's house burned, but we survived. Food is scarce. Everyone is tired. Everyone has lost someone. I do not know when this war will end or what will happen to you, but know this: I am glad you are alive. Whatever happens, whatever anyone says, I am glad you did not die. Come home when you can. Come home alive. That is all I ask. Your loving mother. I read the letter 3 times. Then I folded it carefully and put it in my pocket, close to my heart. My father had removed my photograph from the altar. I was dishonored, dead to him in a different way. But my mother was glad I was alive. That had to be enough. That had to be everything. I sat in that tent as the sun set over Okinawa and cried. Not from shame anymore, from relief, from grief, from the knowledge that somewhere in Tokyo my mother was alive and thinking of me. And I made a decision. I would survive this war. I would go home. I would face my father's shame and the country's judgment. I would live with the fact that I'd failed my mission because my mother wanted me alive. And maybe, just maybe, that was more important than honor. Maybe living for the people who loved you was the real divine wind, the real path of the warrior. Maybe surviving was its own kind of courage. The war would end eventually, and when it did, I'd go home. Not as a hero, not as a god enshrined at Yasukuni, just as a son returning to his mother, and that would have to be enough. August 6th, 1945, POW Camp, Okinawa. The morning started like any other. Roll call at 600 hours. Breakfast, rice and canned vegetables, work details assigned. I was on kitchen duty that week, washing dishes in the mess tent. Mindless work that left too much time for thinking. Then, around 1,000 hours, something changed. The guards were talking in clusters, their voices urgent. Officers were being called to the command tent. Word spread through the camp slowly, prisoner to prisoner, in whispers and fragments. Something had happened, something big. Sergeant Takahashi found me in the mess tent around noon. His face was pale. He looked like he'd seen something he couldn't comprehend. "Yamamoto," he said quietly, "you need to hear this. A city in Japan was destroyed. Hiroshima. Yesterday morning, one bomb, the entire city, gone." I stared at him. "That's impossible. One bomb can't destroy a city. It's a new weapon. Atomic! The Americans just announced it. Tens of thousands dead, maybe more." His voice cracked. "My parents, my family, they were in Hiroshima." The mess kit slipped from my hands, clattered on the floor. Hiroshima, a major city, military headquarters, industrial center. And according to Takahashi, it was just gone, erased by a single bomb. What kind of weapon could do that? Over the next day, more details filtered in. The bomb had detonated over the city center at 850 hours on August 6th. A blinding flash, a fireball hotter than the sun, a shockwave that flattened buildings for kilometers, a mushroom cloud that rose into the stratosphere. Estimates were vague, 60,000 dead in the initial blast, but more dying every day from burns and radiation. Whatever radiation was, the Americans called it the atomic bomb, the end of the world in a weapon. I thought about my family in Tokyo. Were they safe? Was Tokyo next? How many more of these bombs did the Americans have? The prisoners gathered in small groups, talking in low voices. Some were angry. This was a war crime, they said, targeting civilians. Others were resigned. We'd done the same to Chinese cities, after all. A few seemed almost relieved. Maybe this would finally end the war. Maybe we could stop dying. But most of us were just scared. Scared of what this meant. Scared of what came next. August 9th, 1945. Okinawa. 3 days later, it happened again. Nagasaki. Another city, another atomic bomb, another flash of light that erased everything it touched. This time, estimates suggested 40,000 dead. A smaller city than Hiroshima, but the effect was the same. Total destruction. Instant death for anyone caught in the blast radius. Slow death for those outside it. I sat in the camp barracks and tried to process what this meant. Japan had no defense against this weapon, no way to stop it. If the Americans had 2 of these bombs, they probably had more. They could erase Tokyo, Osaka, Kyoto, every major city in Japan, one by one, until nothing remained but radioactive ash. We'd lost. Not just the battle for Okinawa, or the Philippines, or the Pacific. We'd lost everything. There was no coming back from this, no glorious last stand, no divine wind to save us. Lieutenant Sato, the other kamikaze survivor I'd befriended, sat beside me on my bunk. "Do you think they'll surrender now?" he asked quietly. "I don't know. The Emperor has never surrendered. Japanese warriors don't surrender. We did. That's different. We're individuals. The nation is eternal. The Emperor is divine." But even as I said it, I didn't believe it anymore. The Emperor wasn't divine. If he was, he would have protected us from this. Japan wasn't eternal. Empires rose and fell. We'd risen quickly in the last 50 years, defeated Russia, conquered Manchuria and Korea, built a navy that rivaled Britain's. And now we were falling even faster. burned by a sun we'd created ourselves, trying to reach too far, burn too bright. Maybe this was karma, balance, the universe correcting itself. August 15th, 1945. Okinawa. The announcement came at noon. All prisoners were ordered to assemble in the main yard. The camp commander, Colonel Harrison, stood on a makeshift platform with Sergeant Takahashi beside him. Behind them, an American flag hung limp in the humid air. Harrison spoke in English. Takahashi translated, his voice shaking. Prisoners of the Imperial Japanese Armed Forces. At noon today, Japan time, Emperor Hirohito addressed the nation by radio. In his address, the Emperor announced Japan's acceptance of the terms of the Potsdam Declaration. Japan has surrendered. The war is over. Silence. Complete, absolute silence. 400 Japanese prisoners standing in the August heat, and nobody made a sound. Nobody moved. We just stood there trying to process words that seemed impossible. Japan had surrendered. The Emperor, the divine Emperor, descendant of Amaterasu, the living god we'd been raised to worship and obey, had surrendered. Everything we'd been taught was a lie. Everything we'd fought for. Everyone who died, Hayashi and the other kamikaze pilots, Lieutenant Saito, my instructor, the millions of soldiers and sailors and civilians, they'd all died for nothing. The war was over and we'd lost. Harrison continued, under the terms of surrender, all Japanese military personnel are to cease combat operations immediately. You will remain in this camp until arrangements can be made for repatriation to Japan. You will be treated humanely and returned to your families as soon as possible. Still silence. Then slowly someone started crying, then another, then dozens, 400 men who'd been trained never to show weakness, never to cry, breaking down in the Okinawan sun. I didn't cry. I couldn't. I felt hollow, empty, like someone had scooped out my insides and left just the shell. Sato grabbed my arm. It's over. We can go home. Home. To what? To a country that had surrendered. To cities reduced to rubble. To families who'd been told I died with honor, only to discover I'd lived in shame. That night, the camp was chaos. Some prisoners celebrated. The war was over. We'd survived. Others were angry. We should have fought to the last man. The Emperor had betrayed us. A few attempted suicide, though the guards stopped them. I lay on my bunk and stared at the tent ceiling, listening to the sounds of 400 men trying to process the end of the world they'd known. Sergeant Takahashi came to see me around 2200 hours. His eyes were red. He'd been crying. My family in Hiroshima, he said. I got word through the Red Cross. My parents, my sister, my nephew, all dead. Vaporized in the blast, nothing left to bury. I'm sorry. Don't be. Your military started this war. Pearl Harbor, Nanking, Manila. You thought you could conquer the Pacific and no one would stop you. Well, someone stopped you. And this is the price. He wasn't wrong. We'd started this. We'd attacked Pearl Harbor without declaring war. We'd massacred civilians in China. We'd committed atrocities across Asia. We'd convinced ourselves we were liberators, spreading the greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere, when really we were just conquerors in different uniforms. And now we were paying for it, with atomic fire, with surrender, with shame. What happens now? I asked. Now, Takahashi wiped his eyes. Now we all go home and try to figure out how to live in the world we've created. You and me both. Different sides, same war, same scars. September 1945, Okinawa. The weeks after surrender were strange. We were still prisoners, but the dynamic had shifted. The guards were more relaxed. We were allowed to organize our own activities, classes, sports, even a small garden. It felt less like a prison camp and more like a way station, a place to wait until we could go home. Repatriation was slow. There were millions of Japanese soldiers and civilians scattered across the Pacific, China, Southeast Asia. The Americans had to organize transportation, process paperwork, coordinate with the new Japanese government. The new government, not the military dictatorship that had ruled Japan for the past decade. A civilian government under American occupation. MacArthur was in charge now, they said, the supreme commander of the Allied powers. He was running Japan like it was his personal fiefdom. Some prisoners were bitter about this. The emperor reduced to a figurehead. Japan occupied by foreign troops. American values being imposed on Japanese society. It was humiliating, degrading. But others, like me, saw it differently. Maybe Japan needed this. Maybe we needed to be broken completely before we could rebuild properly. Maybe occupation was the price of learning that militarism and empire building led nowhere but destruction. I received another letter from my mother in September. This one was dated August 20th, written just days after the surrender. Dearest Takeshi, the war is over. I hardly know what to feel. Relief that the bombing has stopped. Grief for all we've lost. Fear of what comes next. Your father still will not speak of you. He says a true samurai would have died rather than surrender. He says you bring shame to our family, but I do not care what he says. You are alive. That is all that matters to me. Tokyo is damaged but not destroyed like Hiroshima or Nagasaki. Our house still stands, though the neighborhood is gone. Food is scarce. The Americans are distributing rations through the occupation government. It is strange to depend on our enemies for survival. Come home when they let you. I will be waiting. Your mother. My father's words hurt more than I expected. I'd failed him twice, once by surviving my Kamikaze mission, and again by living through the surrender instead of committing suicide like a proper warrior. But my mother wanted me home. That would have to be enough. In late September, they posted the first repatriation lists, names of prisoners who would be shipped back to Japan on the first transport vessels. 500 names. Mine wasn't on the list. But Sato's was. I'll tell your family you're alive, he promised, the night before he left. If I can find them. Tokyo's a mess, but I'll try. Thank you. He gripped my hand. We survived, Yamamoto, against all odds. That has to mean something. Does it? I'm going to believe it does. You should too. I watched him leave the next morning with the other prisoners. They loaded onto trucks that would take them to the port, then onto ships that would carry them home. Back to Japan, back to whatever remained. I stood at the fence and watched until the trucks disappeared, wondering when my turn would come. November 1945, Okinawa to Sasebo. My name appeared on the repatriation list in early November. Group 47, 200 prisoners. Departure date, November 15th. I had 1 week to prepare, to gather the few possessions I'd accumulated. Letters from my mother, a notebook where I'd been writing my thoughts, clean clothes the Red Cross had provided. Everything fit in a small canvas bag. On November 14th, Colonel Harrison held a final assembly. His last words to us. "You're going home to a country that's different from the one you left," he said through Takahashi. "Japan is defeated, occupied. Your emperor has renounced his divinity. Your military is disbanded. Your government is being rebuilt from the ground up." He paused, looking at each of us. "Some of you will be angry about this, some will resist. But let me tell you something. This is your chance to build something better than what you had before. Something that doesn't require young men to fly planes into ships or charge machine gun nests with bayonets. Something that values life more than honor." Another pause. "You were soldiers. You followed orders. You did what your country asked of you. But now your country is asking something different. Go home, be civilians, build a peaceful Japan. Can you do that?" No one answered. But I thought, yes, maybe I can. The next morning, we boarded trucks for the port. The same port where American invasion forces had landed 7 months ago. Now it was crowded with transport ships flying American flags, carrying former enemies home. The ship was a converted Liberty ship, USS General John Pope, designed to carry troops, now carrying prisoners back to their defeated homeland. We were assigned to below-deck compartments, cramped but clean, better than the barracks at the camp. As the ship left Okinawa, I stood on deck watching the island recede into the distance. That island had been the site of the largest amphibious invasion in the Pacific. Over 12,000 Americans had died taking it. Over 100,000 Japanese soldiers and civilians. And for what? The island looked peaceful now, green, beautiful, like the war had never happened. But the scars were there if you knew where to look. The cratered hillsides, the burned-out buildings, the mass graves. War scars, everything it touches. Even when it's over, the scars remain. November 18th, 1945. Sasebo, Japan. We arrived at Sasebo port on a grey morning. The harbor was crowded with ships, American naval vessels, Japanese fishing boats, merchant ships. All flying different flags, all somehow coexisting in this strange new world of occupation and defeat. As we disembarked, I got my first look at Japan in 8 months. It looked smaller than I remembered, diminished. American military police directed traffic at the docks. American trucks moved supplies. American flags hung from buildings. This wasn't the Japan I'd left. This was occupied territory. The repatriation process took hours. Paperwork, medical screening, identification verification. They gave us each a set of civilian clothes, simple pants and a shirt, nothing fancy, and a small amount of occupation yen. They recorded our home addresses and gave us train tickets. "You're free to go," the processing officer said through a translator. "Return to your families. Register with your local occupation office within 30 days. Violating the terms of surrender will result in imprisonment. Free." The word felt strange. I'd been a prisoner for 7 months. Before that, I'd been a kamikaze pilot, effectively already dead. I hadn't been free in over a year, maybe longer. What did freedom even mean anymore? I took the train from Sasebo to Tokyo. The journey took 2 days. The rail system was damaged, trains ran on irregular schedules, and we had to switch lines multiple times. The countryside looked devastated. Cities reduced to rubble, burned-out factories, homeless families living in makeshift shelters by the tracks. This was the Japan I'd been fighting for. This wasteland, this broken nation. Had my kamikaze attack succeeded? Had I hit that destroyer and died as planned? Would it have prevented this? Would Japan be standing proud and victorious instead of occupied and ruined? No, of course not. One destroyer wouldn't have changed anything. The mathematics had always been wrong. We'd been fed a lie, and we'd believed it because believing gave our deaths meaning. But meaning and truth aren't the same thing. November 21st, 1945, Tokyo. The train pulled into Tokyo Station around 1400 hours. I stepped off into chaos. The station itself was damaged but functional, part of the roof gone, walls scorched by fire, but the platform still worked. Thousands of people moving through, all with the same haunted look. Survivors, refugees, soldiers returning from lost wars. I made my way through the crowds toward the exit. Tokyo looked like a nightmare version of itself. Entire neighborhoods were gone, just foundations and rubble where buildings used to stand. The firebombing campaigns had destroyed over half the city. What remained was scarred, blackened, barely functional. American jeeps patrolled the streets, GIs in clean uniforms walking past Japanese civilians in rags. Occupation headquarters flew American flags. Even the imperial palace looked diminished, still standing, but no longer the center of a divine empire. Just a building, just architecture. I had my mother's address. She'd moved after their old house burned. Tennoji district, she'd written. I asked for directions from a police officer who looked at my repatriation papers and gave me a map. The walk took an hour. Through streets I'd known as a child, now unrecognizable. Past schools that were now just rubble. Past shops that had closed. past families living in shanties built from salvage materials. This was victory. This was the greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere. This was what we'd achieved. I found the building, a 3-story apartment block that had somehow survived mostly intact. 3rd floor, apartment 3C. I climbed the stairs, my heart pounding harder than it had during my kamikaze dive. This was it, the moment I'd been dreading and hoping for in equal measure. Facing my family, finding out if I still had a place in the world. I knocked on the door. Footsteps. The door opened. My mother stood there. She looked older than I remembered. More grey hair, deeper lines in her face, thinner. The war had aged her a decade in 4 years, but her eyes were the same, kind, gentle, full of love. "Takeshi," she whispered. Then she pulled me into a hug and started crying. I hugged her back, feeling her thin frame shake with sobs. My own eyes filled with tears. "You're home," she said. "You're really home. You're alive. I'm sorry, Mother. I'm sorry I survived when—" "No!" She pulled back, looking at me fiercely. "Never apologize for living. Never! Do you understand?" I nodded, unable to speak. She pulled me inside. The apartment was small, one main room that served as kitchen, dining and living area, plus 2 small bedrooms. Simple furniture, a radio, a photograph of my brother in his army uniform on a small shelf. He died in Manchuria in 1944. Next to his photograph was mine, my official portrait in my Navy uniform. I'd been declared dead, but she'd kept my picture up anyway, hoping, praying. "Your father is at work," my mother said, preparing tea. Her hands shook slightly. "He works at a factory now. The Americans are rebuilding industry. He comes home at 1800 hours. Does he know I'm coming?" She hesitated. "I told him you were being repatriated." He said nothing. We sat at the small table. She served tea, real tea, rationed and precious, and told me about the war years, the firebombing, the starvation, my brother's death, the atomic bombs, the surrender, the occupation. "Everything changed overnight," she said. "The Emperor spoke on the radio. Most people had never heard his voice before. He said we must endure the unendurable and suffer what is insufferable. That was how we learned we'd lost." "How did Father take it?" "Badly. He'd believed we would win until the very end. He'd believed in the divine mission. When the Emperor surrendered, something broke inside him. He stopped talking about the war, stopped talking about you and your brother, just went to work every day and came home silent. At 18:15 hours, I heard footsteps in the hallway, a key in the lock. The door opened. My father stood in the doorway. He was thinner than I remembered, his face gaunt, his shoulders stooped. He wore workers' clothes, simple pants and shirt stained with factory grime. He looked like a defeated man. His eyes met mine. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then he stepped inside, closed the door and said, "So, you're alive." "Yes, Father. You failed your mission. You surrendered to the enemy. You brought shame to this family." "Hiroshi," my mother started, but he held up a hand. "Let me speak." He set down his bag, moved to the table, sat across from me. His face was expressionless. "I prayed for your death, not because I wanted you to die, but because I thought you had died, honorably as a warrior. When your mother told me you'd been captured, I don't know what I felt. Anger, disappointment, shame." He paused. "But then I thought, why? Why do I feel this way? You're my son, you're alive. That should make me happy, but instead I feel angry because you chose life over death, because you violated the code, because you embarrassed me." Another pause, and then I realized, the code is dead. The empire is dead. The military is dead. Everything I believed in is dead. We lost the war because we valued death more than life, because we sent boys like you to crash into ships instead of teaching you to come home. His voice cracked. "Your brother died at Mukden. They told me he charged a Soviet tank position with a bayonet. They said he died gloriously, but he's still dead, and I'll never see him again, never hear his voice, never watch him grow old." Tears ran down his face. I'd never seen my father cry, not once in my entire life. "But you're alive," he said. "You chose to live, you chose to come home, and maybe that makes you wiser than I ever was." He stood up, walked around the table, and pulled me into an awkward embrace. "Welcome home, son. I'm glad you didn't die." I hugged him back, both of us crying. My mother joined us, wrapping her arms around both of us. 3 survivors of a war that had taken everything. 3 people who'd lost so much, but somehow still had each other. "I'm sorry I failed," I whispered. "You didn't fail," my father said. "You survived. In this new Japan, that's the victory that matters." December 1945, Tokyo. The weeks after my return were difficult. Not because of my family. They'd accepted me, welcomed me, helped me readjust, but because of everything else. The shame followed me everywhere. People knew I was a former kamikaze pilot. In the old Japan, that would have been honorable. In occupied Japan, it marked me as a fanatic, someone who'd been willing to die for a cause that had led to national destruction. Some people, mostly older folks who'd supported the war, treated me with pity. "Poor boy," they'd say, "forced to make that sacrifice." But younger people looked at me with something closer to contempt. "You were willing to kill yourself for the emperor? For this?" And they were right. I had been willing. I'd volunteered. Nobody had forced me. I'd looked at my options and decided that dying gloriously was better than living with defeat. I'd been a fool. An indoctrinated, propagandized fool. But I was learning. The occupation government had opened schools teaching democratic values, American-style education. I attended classes at night, learning English, learning about different political systems, learning about the world beyond Japan's imperial ambitions. I got a job at a factory making radios, civilian radios, not military equipment, simple work but honest. Constructive, building things instead of destroying them. I met other veterans. Some were bitter, clinging to the old values. Others were trying to adapt, like me. We'd gather in small groups, talking quietly about what we'd been through, about the war, about the shame, about how to move forward. One night in late December, I ran into Sergeant Takahashi at a cafe near the factory. He was in civilian clothes, looking tired but healthy. "Yamamoto," he said, genuinely pleased. "You made it home. So did you." We sat together, drinking weak coffee. He told me about his work with the occupation government, translating, helping with repatriation, serving as a liaison between American forces and Japanese civilians. "How do you live with it?" I asked. "Serving the people who killed your family." He was quiet for a moment. "I don't serve America. I serve the people trying to rebuild, Japanese, American. It doesn't matter. We all lost someone. We all survived. Now we have to figure out how to live together." "Do you hate me for what Japan did?" "I hate what happened. I hate the decisions that led to it, but you were just a kid following orders. Same as the American pilot who dropped the bomb on Hiroshima. Same as everyone who fought in this war. We were all just following orders in a conflict started by old men who stayed safe while young men died." He finished his coffee. "The question isn't whether I hate you. The question is, what do we do now? Do we stay angry and bitter, or do we build something better? I don't know how to do that." "Neither do I, but we'll figure it out. That's what survivors do." March 1946, Tokyo. Spring came slowly to Tokyo. Cherry blossoms bloomed despite everything, despite the rubble, despite the occupation, despite the shame. Nature didn't care about politics or defeat. It just grew. I'd been home 4 months. I was adjusting, learning to live as a civilian, learning to sleep without nightmares of diving into that destroyer, learning to see Americans as people instead of enemies. One day, my mother told me about a program for war veterans, a support group organized by a Buddhist temple in our district. Men who'd served, who'd survived, who were trying to process what they'd been through. I went, reluctantly. The group met in a temple garden. 15 men of various ages. Some had been infantry soldiers, some Navy. One had been a submarine crew member. One had been a POW in the Philippines, like me. The leader was an older monk who'd served in the Russo-Japanese War 40 years earlier. He understood what war did to men. "This is a place without judgment," he said. "What you did in the war, why you survived when others didn't, none of that matters here. What matters is that you're alive and you're trying to figure out how to stay that way." We went around the circle, each man sharing his story. When it was my turn, I hesitated. Then I said, "I was a kamikaze pilot. I was supposed to die. I failed my mission and was captured. Sometimes I think I should have died, that I'd be more useful dead than alive." Silence. Then the monk said, "Do you know why the cherry blossoms are so beautiful?" I shook my head. "Because they're temporary. They bloom brilliantly, then fall. That's what Japan worshipped. The beauty of the brief, perfect death. The kamikaze philosophy. Die young and leave a beautiful corpse." He gestured to the garden. "But look what happens after the blossoms fall. The tree keeps living. It grows stronger. It will bloom again next year. And the year after. Beauty isn't in the death. It's in the continuation, the survival, the growth." He looked at me directly. "You didn't fail by surviving. You succeeded, because now you can bloom again, and again, until you're an old man watching your grandchildren play in gardens like this one." Something shifted in my chest. A weight I'd been carrying since April 1945, since the moment I'd raised my hands in surrender, began to lift. Maybe he was right. Maybe survival wasn't failure. Maybe it was victory. April 12th, 1946, 1 year after my failed mission. On the anniversary of my kamikaze attempt, I went to the ocean, took a train to the coast, walked to the beach, stood at the water's edge watching the waves. Somewhere out there, my Zero was rusting on the ocean floor, along with thousands of other planes, ships, and the bodies of men who hadn't survived. I'd been one of the lucky ones. I'd crashed, failed my mission, been captured, survived. And now, a year later, I was standing here, breathing, feeling the sun on my face, hearing gulls cry overhead, tasting salt in the air. I pulled out the letter I'd written before my mission, the final words to my parents that I'd never sent. I read it one last time. "By the time you read this, I will have struck a blow for the Emperor and our sacred homeland. Do not mourn me. I die with honor, following the path of the warrior. My only regret is that I have but one life to give." Such certainty, such conviction, such utter foolishness. I tore the letter into pieces and threw them into the ocean, watched the paper scatter on the waves, dissolving, disappearing. That boy was gone. The one who'd believed dying was honorable. The one who'd thought individual life meant nothing compared to the collective. The one who'd been so certain of his purpose. I was someone different now, someone who'd learned that survival required its own kind of courage, that living was harder than dying, that coming home and facing your shame was braver than going down in flames. I thought about Lieutenant Wilson's words on that destroyer. Living is harder, and maybe that makes it more honorable. He'd been right. August 15th, 1946, 1 year after surrender. The first anniversary of the surrender was quiet. No celebrations, no official commemorations, just a day marked by reflection and grief. My father and I went to Yasukuni Shrine, the place where Japan's war dead were enshrined. My name had been added to the rolls in 1945, when I was declared killed in action. Now I stood before my own memorial, very much alive. "Should they remove your name?" my father asked. "I don't know. Part of me did die that day, the part that believed in kamikaze, in divine missions, in glorious death." I paused. "Maybe I earned my place here, just not the way anyone expected." We stood in silence for a while. Then my father said, "I'm proud of you." I looked at him surprised. "For what?" "For surviving, for coming home, for choosing life when everything told you to choose death." He put his hand on my shoulder. "That takes more courage than flying into a ship, because you have to live with the consequences. You have to face the shame. You have to wake up every day and choose to keep living. Some days are harder than others. That's true for everyone, veteran or not, kamikaze or farmer. We all wake up and choose to keep going. That's what it means to be human. We walked home together through the Tokyo streets. The city was rebuilding, slowly, painfully, but rebuilding. Construction everywhere. New buildings rising from the rubble. Children playing in cleared lots. Life continuing. Japan would survive. It would change. It would become something different than it had been. But it would survive, just like me. September 1946, Tokyo, 17 months after capture. I met a girl. Her name was Keiko. She worked at the factory office, managing paperwork for the occupation authorities. She was 20, bright, and had lost her entire family in the Tokyo firebombing. We'd been talking for weeks, small conversations in the lunchroom, shared jokes about the chaos of rebuilding. Then one day she asked, "Were you in the war?" "Yes." "Do you want to talk about it?" Most people didn't want to hear. They wanted to forget, move on, pretend the war had never happened. But something in Keiko's eyes suggested she understood, that she carried her own scars. So I told her everything: the training, the mission, the failure, the capture, the shame, the slow process of learning to live with it all. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "My father was a soldier. He died in the Philippines in 1944. They told my mother he died bravely, defending a position against American tanks. We were very proud." She paused. "But I've always wondered, what if he surrendered? What if he's alive somewhere, too ashamed to come home? Would I hate him for that? Would I think less of him? And no, I just want him home. I'd want him alive, because being alive means there's still hope, still possibility. Death is final, life isn't." She looked at me directly. "You chose life. That's not shameful. That's brave." We started seeing each other regularly after that, walking home from the factory, talking about our dreams for the future, about the new Japan that was emerging from occupation, about what we wanted to build from the ashes. She didn't judge me, didn't see me as a failed kamikaze pilot, just as Takeshi, a man trying to figure out how to live. That was enough. April 1947, Tokyo, 2 years after my mission. On the second anniversary of my failed kamikaze attack, Keiko and I went to the ocean together, the same beach I'd visited alone a year before. We stood at the water's edge, watching the waves. She held my hand. "Do you still think about it?" she asked. "About what you were supposed to do?" "Every day, but it gets easier. The guilt, the shame, it's becoming part of who I am instead of all of who I am." "Good, because who you are is pretty great." I laughed. "I'm a failed suicide pilot working in a radio factory." "No, you're a survivor. You're someone who chose life when death would have been easier. You're someone who's learning and growing and building something new." She squeezed my hand. "That's who you are." I thought about that, about how identity isn't fixed, about how we can change, evolve, become something different than we were trained to be. I'd been trained to be a kamikaze pilot, a human bomb, a divine wind. But I'd become something else, a survivor, a builder, a man learning to live. Maybe that was better. Maybe that was what Japan needed. Not glorious deaths, but persistent life. Not warriors, but workers. Not empire, but endurance. "I want to marry you," I said suddenly. Keiko looked at me, surprised. "Are you sure?" "I come with nothing. No family, no dowry, just me. That's more than enough. You're everything." She smiled, kissed me. "Then yes, let's build a life together. Something better than what came before." December 1947, Tokyo, wedding day. We married in a small ceremony at the Buddhist temple where I'd been attending the Veterans Support Group. No family on Keiko's side. They were all gone. But my parents were there, and a few friends from the factory, and some fellow veterans from the group. The monk who'd taught me about cherry blossoms performed the ceremony. He spoke about beginnings and endings, about how life is a cycle, about how the worst moments can lead to the best ones if we're willing to keep living. "You too have survived the worst," he said. "You've seen war, death, destruction. You've lost people you loved. You've faced shame and grief and uncertainty. And yet here you are, choosing to build something together, choosing hope over despair, life over death." He blessed us. We exchanged vows, became husband and wife. After the ceremony, my father pulled me aside. "Your brother would have been proud," he said, "not because you're a war hero, because you're a good man who chose to live and love and build." Thank you, Father. No, thank you for teaching me that survival isn't shameful, that living is the real victory. That night, Keiko and I stood in our tiny apartment, 2 rooms we'd rented near the factory, and looked at the future. Tokyo was still rebuilding. Japan was still occupied. The scars of war were everywhere. But there was hope too. New construction, new ideas. A new generation that would never know the militarism that had destroyed their parents' world. "What do you think will happen to Japan?" Keiko asked. "I don't know, but I think we'll be okay. We'll build something different, something better, something that values life." "Do you ever regret it? Surviving?" I thought about that. Really thought about it. No, not anymore. Because if I died that day in April 1945, I wouldn't have met you, wouldn't have learned what I've learned, wouldn't have this. I gestured around our small apartment. "It's not much, but it's ours, it's life, it's possibility." "That's enough," Keiko said, kissing me. "That's everything." April 12th, 1960, Tokyo, 15 years after my failed mission. Time passed. Years became decades. Tokyo rebuilt. The occupation ended. Japan rose from the ashes, not as a military power, but as an economic one. The miracle, they called it. The Japanese economic miracle. Keiko and I had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. None of them would ever know war. None would be asked to die for their country. They would grow up in peace, prosperity, and democracy. On the 15th anniversary of my kamikaze attempt, our oldest son, 12 years old, asked me about the war. "Father, were you really a kamikaze pilot?" "Yes." "But you survived?" "Yes." "How?" I sat him down and told him the story, the training, the mission, the crash, the capture, the Americans who saved me, the long road home. "So you failed your mission?" he asked. "In a way. But in another way, I succeeded, because I'm here. I'm alive. I have a family. I have a life. Are you ashamed?" I was, for a long time, but not anymore. Now I'm grateful, because failing that mission gave me everything that matters. He thought about that. "The Americans saved you." "Yes, they were my enemies, but they saved me anyway, because that's what humans do. We save each other, even when it doesn't make sense. Will there be another war? I hope not, I pray not. But if there is, I hope you'll choose life over death, hope over despair, that you'll remember that surviving is harder than dying, and that makes it more valuable." He nodded, processing. "I'm glad you survived, Father." "So am I, son. So am I." That evening, Keiko and I walked through Tokyo together. The city was unrecognizable from 1945. Tall buildings, bright lights, cars and buses, prosperity everywhere. The scars were still there if you knew where to look. Monuments to the war, museums, memorials, but they were surrounded by life, by children playing, by couples walking, by normal, peaceful, beautiful life. "Do you ever think about the other pilots?" Keiko asked. "The ones who succeeded all the time. Hayashi, Sato, hundreds of others. They died thinking they were saving Japan. But Japan was saved by the ones who survived, by the ones who came home and rebuilt. You think they'd understand?" "I hope so. I hope wherever they are, they're at peace, knowing that their deaths weren't meaningless, that they died for a Japan that would eventually become this, peaceful, prosperous, free." We walked in silence for a while. Then I said, "I was supposed to die in April 1945. But instead I lived, and every day since then has been a gift. Every moment with you, every laugh with our children, every sunrise, every meal, every quiet evening at home. That's the divine wind, Keiko said quietly. Not death, life, the force that keeps blowing us forward, the force that makes us survive and grow and love. She was right. That was the real kamikaze. Not the suicide attacks that had killed thousands, but the persistence of life, the refusal to give up, the choice to keep living even when death would be easier. I'd been a kamikaze pilot. I'd flown my mission. I'd crashed, but I hadn't died. I'd survived. I'd come home. I'd built a life. And that, more than any glorious death, was the real victory. Thank you for staying with me through this entire journey. If this story made you think differently about war, survival, and what real courage means, I need you to do something. Smash that like button so YouTube knows this story matters. Subscribe to this channel for more untold stories from World War II that will change how you see history. And most importantly, leave a comment below. Tell me, what would you have done in my situation? Would you have gone through with the mission? Let's have that conversation. Because these stories aren't just about the past. They're about the choices we all face when the world asks us to choose between what we're told is honorable and what we know is right. Thanks for listening. And remember, surviving isn't failing. Living is the hardest mission of all. See you in the next one.